We are back with our podcast, Jack. How do you feel about that?
Let's go, baby. Let's talk about Brady.
Brady is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's super important in a criminal case. Super important in our jurisdiction, particularly, I feel like, because we have void of reliable accountability measures for bad cops in Arizona and multiple cities, too. City of Phoenix, Chandler, Mesa. I'm sure you have become familiar with how bad it is.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we explain what Brady is before I get into the context of what we're going to talk about?
So Brady, when the government makes accusations against you, obviously you would assume that they're going to present evidence that they're going to use against you at trial, right? So that's what's called inculpatory evidence that they think supports the conviction or the elements of the charges against you. But they also have an affirmative obligation to turn over evidence that shows that you're innocent. That's called exculpatory material. So particularly in the instance of police officers, for example, it could be a police officer who has a history of lying, some sort of misconduct. They end up on a thing called the Brady list. But there's other information. It could be evidence specifically related to, civilian witnesses, things of that nature, snitches, eyewitnesses who say that wasn't the client that committed the offense, right? They have an affirmative duty to seek out that information and to turn it over. That's what Brady material is.
Absolutely. And we say Brady because it's named after a 1963 SCOTUS case, Supreme Court of the United States. And essentially what Jack said, the prosecution has to disclose evidence that could be helpful to defendant's case. And Jack well knows, because he's good at this, one of our main tactics for defending someone in trial is our ability to cross-examine that person. So information that we would use to successfully cross-examine that person to challenge the nature of whatever they're saying is the truth is very helpful in doing that. And that applies to cops, civilian witnesses, all kinds of witnesses. Now, the context of what we'll be talking about and with Brady information is the murder case that we've been discussing. And like I've said before on other episodes, this murder case, I think, highlights so many things wrong with the system. But one of the interesting parts of this murder case in preparing for trial and going to trial was the Brady information that was discovered, the way it was disclosed, and ultimately the way it was used in this case. When you get a new client, Jack, and the question is, you get asked the question, hey, I feel like these cops are lying. That's not true what they're saying. I may have even heard that these cops don't tell the truth or that they have a bad reputation in my neighborhood. How do you go about finding out Brady information, or how does that information come to you if it exists in relationship to a cop as a witness?
Dig, baby. Dig. Investigate. I bring on my own investigator. I do my own investigation. Do public records requests. The public records law is really good. Police officers or police agencies, I should say, try. Oftentimes, in my experience, I've had this issue in a case where a cop was getting hand jobs from suspects in an investigation. I've had this issue in a case where a cop was previously admitted to committing sex conduct with a minor, where the agencies tried to hide the information. So knowing how to then navigate the public records law, reaching out to witnesses who could have personal information. I tracked down a cop's wife, former partner who he was accused of raping, to get information associated with his acts of dishonesty. Just digging, using every different outlet that you can to try to figure out whether or not the officer has a history, or any witness has a history of lying or dishonesty.
Now, it's good that you went out and got that stuff yourself, obviously, and I'm assuming the hand jobs were illegal hand jobs.
But they didn't get in trouble.
Oh, see, we should talk about that too, because there are lots of ways police officers don't get in trouble in this jurisdiction. And there are lots of pretend measures of accountability, in my opinion. And we could talk about that. But I want to go back a little bit. Do you think it was your job, even though you did do it, to go out and seek that information?
It's not supposed to be my job. This prosecutor's the fucking administrator of justice. They're supposed to be the ones who are supposed to help figure out what the just thing to do is. They're not supposed to do everything that they can to seek a conviction. And that's why you started the podcast off saying that this is one of your favorite things to talk about. It's one of my most frustrating things to talk about because they don't fucking do their job. Number one, a lot of times that happens. Or two, they lie and pretend like they don't have these things. They sweep it under the rug. Some of these things have been exposed in the media within the recent years, but It's not our job. It shouldn't be my job. But the sad part of it is it becomes the duty of the defense attorney for their client to do the digging because you can't trust the system.
Absolutely. So when you're trying to test out if you have a good attorney or not, you need to be asking them these questions about witness backgrounds because that's important information. One of the things that I usually do, I guess strategically when I have a case, is I often do ask the prosecutor to go look for this information because I feel like if they come back to me and they lie about it and I also am investigating it and I find out about it, now I got two issues, right? I got the issue, whatever documents I found, I have that issue, and now I got a prosecutor who's being dishonest or not doing their job, which could also be an issue in a case. And I always found it, maybe I share your frustration, because I always found it frustrating when a prosecutor says, hey, I went and looked, none of this is relevant. What do you find frustrating about that?
What do I find frustrating about it? It's not their fucking decision to decide whether or not it's relevant. It's important that you asked originally or even brought up the Brady case and how it came about in general. Brady goes to witness credibility. That's always at issue in every single trial. That's why they have an affirmative duty to present anything that goes to the credibility of a witness, because it could potentially be exculpatory. It's not the prosecutor's job. It's a jury's decision. It's a jury's decision. It's we the people who make a decision as to whether or not something should be addressed as it pertains to credibility. And obviously a judge acts as a gatekeeper, but the prosecutors constantly think that they are the gatekeepers.
And that's why we make a distinction, right, between disclosure of evidence and admission of evidence, right? Because you need to be disclosing all of it to me. If I ask for it, you need to give it to me so that I can make the decision of what's useful. Ask a judge to use and watch your head there, baby. I could tell this is frustrating. You're banging your head against the wall. And the judge makes a decision whether or not I get to use it, right? Whether or not there's some overriding prejudice or reason that I can't use it. But that's the frustrating push and pull, right? I don't know why. You know, it's not every prosecutor, but some prosecutors try to hide this evidence, and I don't know why that is. You know, you'll get a prosecutor who is maybe considers themselves to be more ethical than others who will say, absolutely disclose it, then we'll talk about admission during trial. And that's actually being able to use the information. Does that information always help your client, Jack?
No. And there's a number of reasons for that. A lot of times we get screwed by judges in terms of the admissibility of the evidence. And, you know, sometimes it just doesn't resonate with some jurors, I think. I mean, it just depends on the nature of the material. Like it really does. It depends on the jury pool that's analyzing the evidence that's presented in the case also. So it just depends.
And it can't be a reach. You know, some people think that they could just use this information to use this information. I've always been of the camp where it has to fit within your narrative, right? It has to fit within your story. Let me give you an example. I once had an officer. I had two examples of stuff in their personnel file, right, that I wanted to use at trial. One example was them just generally being dishonest, and one example was them getting in trouble in the past in their history as a police officer for over pursuing individuals, right? They were doing ridiculous things to try and arrest people or charge them with offenses, even minor civil traffic offenses, right? And I thought there's no way a judge is going to let me get into this over pursuing information, but I'm absolutely going to be able to get into this previous lying incident, right? Well, I presented both of those scenarios to the judge, and the judge did not let me get into the previous lying incident, but did let me get into the over-pursuing incident. Do you know why?
Because the over-pursuing incident goes to the motive bias, is my guess.
Smart
of
man.
That particular
Can't get
officer.
nothing past you, baby.
And the other one relates to specific acts of dishonesty, which your judge is given a lot of discretion on in terms of whether or not they're going to allow that information. And so, you know, clients often get up in arms about, well, why can't we get in that act of dishonesty? And it's difficult to try to get those in because the way that the system works, they want the jury analyzing just the evidence from that particular case. But there's a lot of reasons why the other information needs to come in.
Yeah, good call. And the judge, I think, may have done me a favor because in the end, I used that evidence to show that this officer was lying about what my client did so that he could avoid getting in trouble again for over pursuing my client, right? So he lied about an aggravated assault. And we won that count at trial. So those are the ways in which this information can be helpful. Now, you had mentioned that the issue of Brady information was big in the news a while back. You remember it being big in the news in our jurisdiction. Were you referring to something specific? What do you remember?
There was a prosecutor. There was a case, just a simple drug case, in which the cop claimed that drugs were somewhere where it was in dispute as to whether or not they were even there, and the prosecutor withheld information showing from the guy's personnel file that he had been dinged previously for lying. And then that prosecutor was exposed through some public records requests trying to ask the supervisor whether or not she should just not disclose it after the person was previously convicted. And the individual did some prison time before they were released because it was exposed that this material is withheld.
Yikes.
I mean, there's been a lot more. There's a lot of other issues, too.
Yeah, no, but that's incredible, especially because someone's liberty was at stake. You kind of hinted on something that I think is relevant to our jurisdiction and probably exists in a lot of other jurisdictions. There are a lot of systems to sort of prevent us from getting at this information or hide this information. First of all, you have the police unions, right? Mm-hmm. When they get involved in an officer disciplinary issue, oftentimes stuff gets shutting down. Officers stop talking, investigations don't go as far as they should, people start getting disciplinary sanctions wiped out, reversed, things of that nature. There is the Professional Standards Bureau. Have you ever heard of the Professional Standards Bureau in the city of Phoenix? Mm-hmm. Do you think they conduct reliable investigation?
No, because they're not independent and neutral.
Exactly. Why would you say they're not independent and neutral?
Because of the people that they bring on board to handle that stuff. I mean, you can't be looking in-house. I mean, ideally you should be able to do that in-house, but it's not set up appropriately in that agency in particular.
We also have civilian review boards. Now, that's just not a Phoenix thing. That exists in probably every city in the country. But those civilian review boards are often stacked with, hand-picked political appointees who are just there to, go with the flow, maintain the status quo, and not try to challenge things. All of those things can be significant hurdles for us to get at this information that's useful to our clients in trial. Now, I want to bring us back to something that was also in the news. You talked about a specific case in the news, but if you remember, this was a big issue. The disclosure of this information was a big issue with the Phoenix police chief and our sitting county attorney at the time. But before we get into that, we're going to take a little break. Do you want to tell the people what law firm we work at?
Oh, listen, it's Litwak Law Group. If you guys ever need anything, you call us, 602-609-3803. We litigate these issues constantly. The government's constantly playing games with people's liberty, hiding this information. We'll fight every aspect of this type of shit.
All right. What I love about going to trial is telling my client's story. When you're looking for an attorney, you're going to need to find an attorney who can tell a story and tell your story. Building a narrative is important. From day one, when an attorney gets started on your case, an attorney needs to analyze the evidence that supports your story, find the evidence that supports your story, and be able to tell that story in a courtroom to a jury. That's what we love to do. If you find yourself needing an attorney, give us a call. We were talking about the news and Brady information being on the news. There are a couple actors who you would think need to be aware of what Brady information is, right? These people have power within the criminal system. They make decisions with the criminal system that affect our clients' lives. Mm-hmm. Who would some of those actors be, would you say?
Police chiefs, prosecutors, police agencies, unions, crime labs,
yeah, there you go. Police chiefs, prosecutors, right? Mm-hmm. These are the movers and shakers in the system, right? And the people who kind of control how the system works. When this big Brady blow up in our jurisdiction happened, there are a couple people who were interviewed on the news. So I'm going to read you some statements, and I'm going to see if you can tell me if those statements are accurate, and two, who they might have come from. Okay. So when asked about Brady, this is what this individual said. I feel that that's a process that's been set up to make sure that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and the prosecutors can engage in asking people questions in the voir dire process.
That's fucked up.
Is that an accurate description of Brady?
No, that's not remotely accurate.
Do you know who said that? I'm gonna give you some options so that you don't have to come up with it.
I think I know because I saw this. Was this the police chief?
This was Chief Williams,
Yeah.
describing what Brady information is. This is the chief, right? One of the people who control and have a lot of power in the system, like you just said, is chiefs of police, right? When asked to clarify that regarding Brady, she said, "I got asked some questions about Brady, and there are a couple questions that I misspoke on." Now, this is a person, it's her police that the information is collected on. It's her police where the information is stored, right? It's her department where the information is stored. You would think that she would know. Doesn't know, right? That could cause a problem, right? If she doesn't know, then who's managing the system? Who's ensuring that defendants are getting a fair shake?
And how is it getting sent over to the prosecutor's office, even if the person overseeing it is not understanding what it is?
Exactly,
That's
baby.
the concern.
Let's play the game again because I like that. I like your answer. I like the candor of your answer.
Well, that one I knew. Let's go on the next one.
When asked about Brady, this person said, "This is a disclosure issue, meaning our lawyers, when they see integrity issues, send that off to a judge, and a defense attorney is notified, and a judge makes the decision if someone should be disclosed."
No, first of all, that's Rachel Mitchell, right?
That is not Rachel Mitchell. Was the county attorney at the time.
Was that Alistair?
That was Alistair.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
But the response kind of gave it away. But what's wrong with that description?
That's not how it fucking works. We have to get access to it to discern whether or not because a judge is just one person, right? That might have a singular legal opinion. If we're not given access to the material, then we can't make an appropriate record for the Court of Appeals, who may oversee the trial judge's wrong interpretation of whether or not something's admissible. So we should be getting it because it also may help us uncover additional information, not just about that witness, but within the course and scope of the investigation of that particular witness if we're talking about a police officer.
Exactly, for sure. When asked to clarify that response, this person said, "I misspoke, and the process is that a judge determines admissibility of Brady information," which is an inaccurate clarification because that's also wrong. But like you're saying, these are the people who control the destiny of these criminal cases, and they can't accurately describe this information. Now, let's get back to the murder case and how this plays into this murder case, right? Now, the murder case involved a gang expert. You ever dealt with a gang expert before?
Yeah, I'm in a gang case. Well, I'm in a case that the government's trying to claim is a gang case, but provide absolutely no documentation of gang evidence right now. And they brought in a gang expert who is supposed to be a blind expert, which is not supposed to have information related to the case, yet they fucking have 8 years of information about my client, though he wasn't allegedly a documented gang member until after the alleged incident. So how he has 8 years is absurd. But that's one gang expert I'm dealing with right now. I've also hired my own.
Absolute absurdities sometimes when you deal with gang experts, right? Because the way that they apply our gang statutes here locally, there's a lot of subjectivity, right? And they basically just get to make up whatever indicators. Well, I shouldn't say make up. Maybe that's inaccurate to say. But they basically get to subjectively apply statutory indicators of gang membership and activity to whoever they want. Mm-hmm. And that's often how it happens in our jurisdiction and probably others as well. So back to my gang case. I couldn't get this officer's records in time. You've probably asked police departments for records before. How fast do they turn them around?
Dude, we have a case that was set for trial next week, and I'm still litigating 4 days before and getting information the week before that they haven't provided for over a year. So They're constantly holding information, not providing information at all, number one, and two, expeditiously.
Right. And that obviously causes problems for us because if we can't get the information in time that we need it, we can't prepare for cross-examination, we can't prepare for trial, and we're potentially having to go without this information that, and a lot of times we know is there, right? Let's take the gang expert in my murder case. I asked him if he's ever been in trouble before. Guess what he said?
In his interview or on the stand?
In his interview.
His response, maybe nothing worth talking about.
Why do you say that? Why wasn't it
that's
just a yes or no for you?
That's the typical fucking response because they don't want to lie on the record in case you find it. So they try to give you a little bit of a tidbit without giving you the real meat and potatoes.
Right. Now, this is a question that I've learned in my practice to ask probably almost every interview I do with a police officer. I ask this question. How do you practice? How do you try to get at this information when you interview police officers?
It's a really good question. So I also did that largely in the beginning of my practice. Now, having our own office and kind of having a lower caseload, what I try to do is I try to set it up beforehand where I have the information, the personnel file, things of that nature. If I know a case is going to go to trial before I do the interview, so I have the answer to the question before I ask them. So if they lie, I can figure out how I'm going to handle it during the interview.
I really appreciate that you brought up that strategy because I want to talk about an example. I'm going to ask you about your worst example of getting Brady information that you've ever experienced. I'm going to voir dire you a little bit here. But before you tell me what that is, I'll tell you my example. One time I was interviewing a police officer. It wasn't from the Phoenix Police Department. It was from an East Valley agency, I believe. And I asked him if he's ever been in trouble before. And he did not know that I already had his personnel file before I went into that interview, right? So he thinks I don't know. So he tells me, no, I've never been in trouble before. And I said, are you sure you never faced any disciplinary action? You never been caught for any incidents of dishonesty, anything like that? He said, nope, never. Then I pull out the file I have and I put it down in front of me and I said, this says that it's been recommended that you've been fired before. And he looked me dead in my eye and said, wow, I didn't know you could find that.
It's ridiculous.
Do you have a similar experience with an officer, or what's one of the worst examples that you've ever had where you've discovered Brady or someone tried to lie about Brady?
It's going to take a long time if I tell you. I had a case where my client was charged with serious felony offenses, numerous cases involving all of the same officer. There was 6 other lawyers. I think they were all court appointed previously before I came in. The guy was facing decades in prison. His plea offer was 20 years. We go to a settlement conference, which is where you're trying to negotiate, obviously, for a plea offer short of going to trial. And before we get in, just like you were talking about sometimes how you find out, the client's family said, hey, there's something up with this officer. He transferred agencies. So I go and I ask the prosecutor just on the fly whether or not she got information related to her cop that I thought there was something up. And I knew it just didn't pass the sniff test. She was bullshitting completely. When she said, no, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Then she goes out into the hall. Or she has the guard print something off for her. She asked me to come out in the hallway. She gives me a letter from her office saying, hey, this officer, who is no longer a police officer anymore after all of this, is suspected to have committed sexual misconduct with a minor. So I flipped out. I'm yelling because she fucking lied to me. She hid it from me. She hid it from my client for 3 years before I was involved.
That's ridiculous. 3 years is a long time to sit on something like that.
Oh, it got even crazier after that.
Wow.
It got way crazier after that.
That is something we should talk about one day.
Oh, we'll talk
Maybe
about
a whole episode. That deserves a whole episode. Let's get back to the murder case. So I'm trying to get this information for the gang expert. He says he's never been in trouble before, but I suspect something's up. The news breaks about the Maricopa County Attorney Office not knowing Maricopa County Attorney not knowing really what Brady meant. The Chief of Police not knowing really what Brady meant. We go into court one day and the judge says, you know what, prosecutor? I was watching the news the other day and I saw what Alistair Adele and the Chief of Police said about Brady information. And I want to make sure in this case, I know Mr. Williams has some pending requests. I want you to go back and double check every witness you've noticed in this case who's a police officer and see if there's not something that you need to disclose when you look at their files. So he goes back. What do you think I get?
Oh, I'm sure you got more material.
All of a sudden, I get more information. All of a sudden, I get Brady information about that exists in officers' personnel files, particularly with this gang expert, that are super concerning. So this guy who told me he's never been in trouble before actually has been investigated for a criminal offense in the past that had to deal with an interaction when he was on the gang squad. And what kind of case are we dealing with in this trial? A gang case, right? And he wants to take the stand and seem like he's a neutral investigator, neutral expert, neutral police officer. And now I know in his past, he has an incident that involved a gang member. What do you think he was investigated for?
Drugs? Was there anything involving drugs?
Nah, that would be crazy. But it wasn't drugs. This guy, after telling me no, he's never been in trouble before, was investigated for assault for spitting on a handcuffed person in the back of his gang squad car and threatening this person with his gun.
It's fucking disgusting.
This is an alleged gang member, right? And when he got up to trial, eventually, I'm skipping ahead of myself here. When he got up to trial, he wanted to tell the jury. Well, he told the jury, and I got to get into some of this information because of what he told the jury, that he got involved in investigating gangs because he wanted to help people and do what's right for his neighborhood. Well, would a guy who wanted to help people and do what's right for his neighborhood spit on a handcuffed person in the back of a gang car and threaten them with a gun just because of an allegation of being a gang member?
No.
That sounds like someone who has a vendetta. That sounds like someone who has it out for certain people in the neighborhood. And it sounds like someone who might lie on the stand if they want someone to seem worse than they actually are. Mm-hmm. And that's how we're able to get into information like this. And that's how this information was developed in this murder case. Now, if you don't have this information, someone like this guy, a gang expert, is going to be able to take the stand and put on the song and dance of a gang expert. You know, you probably know quite well some of the things they're going to say. If you don't have this information, what could a witness like this say to a jury?
Well, they're going to, first of all, bolster their training and experience, their background. They're going to try to appear as if they're neutral arbiters of the truth, right? Neutral investigators. And then they'll, just in terms of gang opinions, you want to know what type of opinions they're going to make? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. I mean, they'll come in there and say, you know, based on, you know, this particular area, you know, these people are known to fly these certain colors, so on and so forth, and commit these certain types of activities for the benefit of the gang. I had one the other day where he's saying, you know, gangs obviously deal drugs. And I said, people within the gang use drugs, right? Fucking refuse to acknowledge that they use drugs. I got, this guy's got a prior conviction for drug use. For fun? Like, there's just, he's hanging out with the drugs? I mean, it's got nothing to do with using the drugs. Like, you could, but refuse to acknowledge. So you have tunnel vision that, you know, could cloud the ability to provide an actual objective opinion related to gang activity. It's not a neutral opinion that they provide oftentimes because they want to secure a conviction as opposed to just provide jurors with the information unadulterated.
The only way you're going to break that up, the only way you're going to challenge that witness is if you have enough information about that witness's actions in the case and their history to challenge them when they're on the stand in front of a jury. Next time, I want to talk about a different issue in this case, but there's so much to choose from. There's a plethora of information in this murder case, but I also think I want to invite my client on at one point so we could talk to him.
All right,
what
cool.
He thought about
all right, that's
stuff.
cool. I like that.
Well, every time I think about this case, I just get shocked. So I could go on and on about this case, but we want to thank everyone for joining us to talk about Brady information and how that comes into play and testing a witness's credibility on the stand. I'm Jamaar Williams. This is Jack Litwak, and we are with the Litwak Law Group. Call us if you have any questions.